So I'm sure a lot of people are aware of a recent video that just came out, and it was kind of ranking the most popular anime from the 60s to today's date. And let me tell you, what a absolute disaster that was, but what a brilliant idea actually. So I thought to myself, you know, what if I did this with manga? So essentially what I'll be doing is I'll be reading the very first chapter of some of the most popular manga that came out from 1961 all the way up to 2025. And I'll be taking one manga from each of those years, reading the first chapter, and ranking just the very first chapter. And I just wanted to clarify, me ranking the first chapter or something does not mean that I'm ranking that series entirely based on the first chapter. This is me solely ranking the first chapter. Just because I think maybe something's a C does not mean I think the whole series is a C. It just means I feel like maybe it got off to like a bad start. So just wanted to clarify that. And one more thing I wanted to say about the ranking system is I'll be doing it from S to C. Now I'll be doing C, C+, B, B+, A+, and S. Yokoso, my manga society. So now that we got that all out of the way, let's get into the very first manga from 1961. So Mutant Sabu, this first chapter was actually crazy because in this chapter it talks a lot about evolution amongst animals and humans, and so he kind of gets into a crash and gets blood infused in him because he's losing a lot of blood, and so it turns out that he gets like these powers of like telepathy and telekinesis, and so that's kind of like where the story starts. So I wasn't not expecting to like that as much as I did, but for the very first chapter of this entire video, I'm gonna have to give that an A+. So let's move on to the next one, which is Osomatsu-kun. So this one is a pretty short chapter. If you don't know about it, it's about these sextuplets. And the joke around the show is that they all look alike, they all wear the same thing, so it's kind of like hard to differentiate. And then some people don't actually know that there's 6 of them. I'm giving this one a C. Next one, we got 8 Man. So this is kind of like a superhero-ish type of story. We start off with a man at his house. We kind of learn that he's a detective, so he goes off, he gets a phone call. Eventually he kind of like transforms into like this suit, and he's like pretty strong and fast, and that's kind of like where the story ends. I wish we would have gotten a little more. So this was like another surprisingly interesting chapter. I feel like, I don't know, I didn't know there were so many interesting mangas like back in the day. I feel like they would actually do pretty well if they were like reprinted in like, I don't know, physical copies. So I'd be down if some of these had like physical English copies, but I think I'm gonna give this one a B+. Okabe no Kyutaro. So this one was pretty interesting. This one's kind of like about a ghost. In this first chapter, there's a kid and he comes along to this egg, and inside this egg it hatches a ghost, and I guess they do kind of become friends because the kid wanted nothing to do with him, but eventually they come together, and yeah, I don't know, it was pretty interesting, also pretty short. Okay, so I think this one is also gonna have to go into C. Rainbow Sentai. So this one's a pretty big robot story. There's a team of like robots, and there's some evil forces that are attacking the Earth. Basically, that's it for this first chapter. But we learn that the guy has like this supernova power, and he can kind of like, you know, do this huge explosion. But I don't know, I feel like it didn't really like hook me as much as like some of the other ones did. So I'm gonna give this one a C+. So next up we have Sally the Witch. This one caught me by surprise because hearing the name of the manga, I thought it was just gonna be like a society of witches, but inside the first chapter, we actually learn that there's a house that ends up on Earth from space. Sally is also in, and she's a witch, and she kind of wants to like go to school, but she's not allowed to. So this one, I definitely enjoyed. I'm gonna give this one a B+. Lupin the Third was really weird in the sense that I feel like there's a lot of like perviness going on. Lupin is like disguised as like I don't know, like a servant or something, or kind of like a nerdy guy. And so he's trying to just look for this like microchip. It was interesting, but I'm gonna have to give this one like a B. So Ashita no Joe is actually the first one that I have the actual physical copy for. So these are like reprints, but it's cool that I actually own a copy of a manga that was in the 60s. So overall, I love Ashita no Joe, but for the first chapter, I'm actually gonna have to give this a B. So this is Doraemon. If you don't know what Doraemon is, it's like, he's like a robot from the future, I believe. I don't know if he's a robot, but he comes from the future and he comes with this kid's great-grandson, I believe. And so they kind of like come back with like a bunch of gadgets. And this first chapter was just kind of like an introduction of that. But overall, extremely interesting. I'm actually gonna give this one an A. So now that we've gotten through the 60s, let's go through the 70s. So this first one is gonna be called Baron 1. And so this one's a little weird. It starts off with a couple of friends who have a friendly competition out at the sea. They get in a boat crash. They get talked to by like this angel person. They have to kind of combine into one person. I'm actually gonna give this one an S. So moving on to 1971, we got Sangokushi. So this one seems kind of like a historical fiction. And so it kind of reminded me a little bit of like the setting of maybe like Kingdom. And so it's about this peddler. The village that he's currently in gets attacked by yellow scarves, and it kind of seems like he's going to become a warrior. So I'm actually going to give this one an S as well. So moving on to 1972, we actually have Devilman. The first chapter was actually pretty interesting. I actually didn't know, because the anime is called Devilman Crybaby, and so the main character is kind of like a crybaby. And the premise, obviously, they become like devils. I don't know if they like compete with each other or whatnot. So I'm gonna give this one an A. So next up, we got a manga called Violence Jack. So Violence Jack, this is actually gonna be rated pretty low. I'm gonna explain the first chapter. So all these like calamities, like natural disasters, kind of like destroy the earth, and it's not until like the end of the chapter do we even get introduced to like the main character or any characters at all. So I'm gonna give this one a C. So 1974, The Great Mazinger. The first chapter is pretty interesting. You meet the main character who pilots the Mazinger, and then the main villain is Dr. Hell. I don't know, it's kind of like just a setup kind of chapter. We meet a lot of the villains, we meet a lot of the protagonists, and so this will get a B+. So next up we got The Window of Orpheus. So this one was pretty interesting too. It seems kind of like a romance type story. The premise of chapter 1 is basically this window at the top of this one building. If you go up there, look down, and the first like girl that you see is kind of like your soulmate or something. So I don't know, I just kept getting like confused. I'm gonna give this one a C+. So the manga from 1976 is called Atagol. And so this one's kind of about, it starts off with these cats kind of like walk into this other realm or world, and so they can actually like talk now, and they like walk on two legs. Kind of just seems like a comedy fantasy type story. I actually gave this one an A. So 1977 is actually Captain Harlock. Now I feel like this one's actually pretty popular too. The first chapter, you kind of learn that Earth's civilization has kind of like given up on like, you know, because they're running out of resources and stuff. Captain Harlock kind of comes in, and so it's actually a really great setup. And so I'm gonna actually give this one an S. So moving on to 1978, we got Time Patrol Bond. So this actually got an anime, and it was pretty interesting. These timekeepers kind of come into the past and save people that don't have like any historical importance. The timekeepers learn that the main character actually has some like historical importance down the road. So then, yeah, I don't know, this setup was like actually really good. So this is gonna get an A+. So we're at the last manga for the 70s. So this one's called Arion, and so this one's kind of about a child who's like the kid of like a god. Hades is their uncle. So Arion is actually the child of like Poseidon, and so Hades comes to visit, kidnaps Arion, and so I don't know, this was like pretty interesting. So this is gonna go in A+. So the first manga of the 80s that I read was actually Dr. Slump. So this one's actually like extremely popular, pretty funny for the first chapter. It's just a comedy. Overall, first chapter, it's about like this android girl who's like supposed to be the most realistic android, but you know, there's like defects. I don't know, it is funny. I'm gonna give this a B+. So 81, I feel like, is also a pretty well-known manga, sports manga, Captain Tsubasa. So this one was like actually crazy because the main character, he kind of like wants to prove himself. So later he's like pretty young, and so he kicks this soccer ball off the hill and challenges this goalkeeper, and they're all like, no way he kicked this ball down the hill, like it's so far away. And so I don't know, it's kind of crazy. I'm gonna give this one an A+. So this next one is Akira. This, wow, I don't know. I've never like read the manga. I know I've like watched the film a bunch of times, but this first chapter is so true to like the anime. One of their friends crashes into this, kind of like you learn later, he's like an experiment in this lab. And so the gang is like trying to figure out where he is. I haven't read the manga all the way through, but this first chapter is gonna get an S. So 83 was Fist of the North Star. So I've actually read this recently, but the first chapter, not a lot actually happens. You learn that, you know, it's a pretty apocalyptic setting, and you learn that Ken is kind of like trudging through the desert. He needs water, and so you learn that he's kind of like the heir of the Hokuto Shinken. And so, yeah, it's kind of crazy because it's this crazy like martial arts story, and it's really good. So I gave this one an A. So 1984 was the year that Dragon Ball actually came out. So this one is pretty straightforward, but I'm gonna have to say, I didn't know Goku had a tail. Okay, in all seriousness, this was a pretty good intro chapter. You kind of learn Goku is kind of like his grandpa died, and you meet Bulma. And so I feel like everyone kind of knows this story, and you learn about the Dragon Balls, and they're gonna go on the journey to find the Dragon Balls. So I'm gonna give this one an A. So City Hunter is actually extremely interesting. It starts off with this boxing competitor, and he's like training, but then this other competitor is kind of like coming up behind him, and he kind of like actually kills him, which is crazy. But then they hire the main character. In the end, he kind of like, in the boxing ring, he shoots the guy like in the ear as the other guy's like punching him. So it's actually insane. But I'm gonna give this one a B+. So 1986 is actually called Rakudai Ninja Rantaro. So this one is like a full-on like comedy. The art style is like rough, I think on purpose. And so it's basically just about like ninja school. A lot of like corny, childish jokes. I think this is like for kids, so I feel like if you're a kid, this would definitely be funny, but I'm gonna give this a C. So 87 was actually the first part of JoJo's. That's when it started. So this chapter, I feel like, was a pretty good introduction. Obviously, nothing crazy actually happens, but we learn that Dio is gonna live with Jonathan, and we kind of learn that he's evil because he like kicks Jonathan's dog. And so, yeah, we learned that Jonathan is a good guy, Dio's the bad guy. So, decent first chapter. I'm gonna give this one an A. So, Yaiba was actually pretty interesting. So, this was created by the same guy that did Case Closed. And so, it's about these samurais, this dad who raises his kid kind of like in the jungle, it seems like, but then they come back to civilization, and the kid kind of doesn't know like anything about civilization. So, they're gonna enter, I think, like some sort of samurai or like kendo competition. So it's pretty interesting. I think I might even collect this. I'm gonna give this one a B+. So 1989 was actually Berserk. So this first chapter was actually like absolutely amazing. We learn about Guts, we meet Puck, and we actually get to see him kill like an entire apostle. So this was a great intro chapter. I feel like I have nothing bad to say about it at all. The art's amazing, so I'm gonna have to give this an S. So we're in the 90s now, which is actually kind of crazy. We've read, what, 3 decades of manga? That's insane. So this first one is Yu Yu Hakusho, and I've seen this entire anime. I've actually never read the manga, but in this first chapter, it's about a boy who dies who didn't actually need to die, saving a little boy from a truck. And so the story is kind of starts out with, you know, you can get revived if you pass this test. So eventually he does agree to go along with this plan. So I'm gonna give this an A+. It's really good. So 1991 is Baki. So Baki, I feel like, has a pretty interesting first chapter. I feel like you don't get to see too much of Baki, but you do get to see how crazy the world is, how crazy the fights are. They're in the middle of like a tournament, and then Baki's kind of getting ready to fight. Pretty interesting first chapter. I'm gonna give this an A. So Gin Tokin is actually created by the same person that has done Kaiji. I feel like this start is a little lackluster. Now I can tell that eventually it'll probably get into some crazy stuff. In this first chapter, the main character loses some money at like a horse race, and then Gino, like this guy, kind of like tells him he can make some money, so they go back to like his place. I feel like I didn't get too much from this. I'm actually gonna give this a C+ for now. So Blade of the Immortal, the first chapter, so the main character you learn is immortal. He has some sort of bloodworms inside of him, and so a lot of things happen, like he accidentally kills like his sister's husband, and then they get jumped, and then his sister dies, and then the person that I think made him immortal, he promises to kill like 1,000 men for the rest of his life, like 1,000 bad guys, so a little crazy. I'm actually gonna give this one a B+. So 1994 is Case Closed. So this is a pretty iconic, one of the most like, you know, recognized anime manga. And so this first chapter is actually like really good for such an episodic manga. You learn about the main character Jimmy, and he actually solves a mystery. He's trying to be like a world-class detective, and then at the end of the volume, he turns into a child. So that's like basically the premise of the whole story. And so yeah, I'm actually gonna give this an S. It's really good. So Initial D was pretty interesting. So the main character actually isn't even like interested in cars. They talk about like a racing hill, and eventually we come to know that the fastest person driving down that hill is actually the main character, who's actually just delivering tofu. So I'm gonna give Initial D an A. So the first chapter of Inuyasha, it was okay. We learn a little bit about like the demons and stuff, and then it fast forward to the future. The main character, she like falls down a well, a demon pulls her in, and then she kind of learns like who her ancestors are. Now, she runs into, you know, Inuyasha, and yeah, it was an okay first chapter. I'd give it a B. So 1997 was actually One Piece. So One Piece actually had a great first chapter. You learn about Luffy's backstory, about how Shanks loses his arm, about how Luffy gets like the gum fruit power, and then it fast forward at the end with like a crazy gum pistol like punch. So it was really good. I'm gonna give this an A. So 1998 is Hunter x Hunter. So Hunter x Hunter had a really good first chapter. You learn about Gon, you learn about Kite, you learn about Gon's dad, and the world building is just really good altogether. And at the end of the chapter, Gon goes off on his adventure. So pretty short first chapter, but really good. I'm gonna give this an A. So coming up on the final 1990s manga, we have Naruto for 1999. So this was an extremely strong chapter. You learn about the Naruto backstory with the demon fox and how everyone excludes him. It's pretty sad. I'm gonna be giving this one an A+. Snapkin. So let's move on to the 2000s. So the very first one I want to talk about is Battle Royale for 2000. And this was a really good first chapter because Battle Royale is like a death game. And so it starts off explaining the game, and then later on, when the main characters grow up, they get introduced into the game. So the hook of this first chapter was actually really good, and I'm gonna have to give it an A+. So 2001 was Bleach, which actually is one of the big three. And so if you know anything about old shonens, they start with the good old, here's your character, here's a little bit about him, here's how he gets his powers. So that's basically what happens in Bleach. You learn about Ichigo, you learn about how he gets his power, and yeah, it's overall pretty good. So I'm gonna give this an A. So iShield 21 is a sports manga about American football, and so that's kind of crazy. That's kind of like you never really see any sort of manga about American football. And so it starts off with like this cowardly main character, and throughout the story you know he's going to be able to grow, but in this first chapter you learn that he's super fast, and he gets kind of like tricked into joining the football team. So I feel like it'll get better later on. I'm going to give this one a B+. So Death Note is another one of these like super popular, one of these classics. You know the first chapter is already going to be amazing. You learn about Light, and he gets the Death Note, and it's just like this crazy wild concept. Like you write this guy's name in a notebook and they die. So extremely unique. You learn about some of the characters, you learn about Shinigamis, and so I'm giving this one an S. So D Greyman is one of those unique shonens back in the day where I feel like it's one of those exorcism type of shonens where there's demons and stuff, but there's kind of like a twist. The demons are actually like possessed other people, but they're actually like weapons, and so you have to like exorcise them. Pretty interesting. You get to know the main character and the main villain actually, and so I feel like if you don't know much about like older shonens, I feel like you could get pretty confused. I'm gonna be giving this one a B. So Solanin is 2005, and I'm just gonna say this was like a pretty slice of lifey manga. You kind of just learn about like the main character's life, and she quits her job, and then you learn that she has like a boyfriend, and that's all there really is to it. So I'm gonna be giving this one a B+. So 2006 was Fairy Tail, and it's just kind of like the first chapter is like an introduction to like the magic system and the main characters, and there's like a huge fight. It was pretty good, but like a pretty basic shonen, so nothing crazy. I'm gonna be giving this one a B. So Goodnight Poon Poon is a story about a kid named Poon Poon, and he's depicted as like this ghost looking character. And right off the bat, chapter 1, you kind of like learn about his home life, his friend life, his school life. You're introduced to a lot of different characters, and nothing crazy, except till the end of the chapter, you learn that this manga is probably gonna have some dark themes. So pretty interesting first chapter. I'm gonna give this one an A. So 2008 is actually Billy Bat, and if you know me at all, I'm a pretty big Urasawa fan, and so I've been like extremely excited to read this one. And the first chapter was so interesting because in the story there's a bat. You can kind of relate it to like an icon like Mickey Mouse or something, but this manga starts off with that character like inside of that story. So I think the main story will be tying into this comic of Billy Bat somehow, and it's extremely interesting. So I'm gonna give this first chapter an A+. So Attack on Titan is the last one of the 2000s, and this first chapter, I feel like everyone knows what Attack on Titan is, what it's about, but the first chapter is such a great introduction to the world building's really good, and the character introductions is so like good too. So it's like, you learn about these Titans, you learn that they're trapped in the wall, you see the Colossal Titan kick down the wall. For the first chapter, I'm gonna be giving this an A+. So the first manga of the 2010s is actually Alice in Borderland. So now I feel like this is a really good example of the first chapter does not necessarily reflect the entire series, because this is actually one of my favorite seinens. So in the first chapter you learn about like the 3 main characters, they're kind of like delinquents, but then they get transported to this other like universe or dimension. You don't actually know like where they went, and so you don't really get a good grasp of like the world building or anything, but it is a decent hook. But overall, I'm gonna have to give this one a B+. So 2011 is Tokyo Ghoul. So Tokyo Ghoul is actually extremely popular. I feel like everyone knows about it. The art's amazing, and the first chapter is such a great setup with like the ghoul introductions, the main character introductions, what happens to the main character, like explaining the powers and stuff. I feel like it doesn't fully get into that yet, but like showing and not telling in the first chapter was so good. I'm gonna give this one an S. So 2012 is Haikyuu, another one of those extremely popular sports manga, and this one's actually volleyball, so pretty interesting. You don't see too many popular volleyball mangas, and this was, you know, a pretty good introduction to the characters and a setup to where the main character has a rival, but then they end up on the same team. So pretty good first chapter. I'm gonna be giving Haikyuu an A. So The Ancient Magus Bride was actually a really good first chapter. This one's about a girl who kind of got like sold off, but the guy who like bought her has like a skull face and is sort of like a magician, and he wants to take her under her wing because she's like kind of special in a way. Now we don't know yet how, and at the end of the chapter we learn that he actually wants to make her his bride. Really good first chapter. I'm gonna give it an A+. So 2014 was My Hero Academia, and the first chapter was decent. It was about, you know, the main character. You learn that he doesn't have any powers and he wants to be a hero, so it's kind of like conflicting, but then he shows like his heroicness and saves like his school bully. And yeah, I'm a pretty big fan of like the manga and all, but I'm gonna have to give the first chapter a B. So next up we got Black Clover. It's a lot about like magic. There's a magic system, and the main character actually doesn't have magic, and in this first chapter they get assigned their grimoires, but then towards the end of the chapter the main character actually gets assigned the Black Clover grimoire. The first chapter I'm actually going to be giving a C+. So 2016 is Demon Slayer. So the first chapter, the main character Tanjiro, you learn that his whole family was killed by demons and that his younger sister was turned into a demon. So one of the highest ranking like demon slayers comes by and checks to see what's like happening, and he almost kills the main character's sister. I'm gonna be giving this a B. So moving on to Dr. Stone. Dr. Stone's had such a great first chapter. You learn that in this chapter, the main character is pretty much a genius. And then in the middle of the chapter, everyone in the world gets petrified or turned to stone. And 3,000 years later, the main character wakes up and has to like restart civilization from zero basically. This is gonna get an A+. So 2018 is when Blue Lock came out. Blue Lock is such a unique sports manga. I feel like it veers away from every sports manga like trope that you like ever have seen. And it's about soccer, and it's basically like a battle royale soccer. And the first chapter was so hooking. This is gonna be getting an S for me. So to finish off the 2010s for 2019, we have Die Dark. Now Die Dark's like a really dark comedy, and the first chapter goes over kind of like the main character and sort of the plot-ish. You don't get too much world building, but if you're able to get the main character's bone, then it'll grant you like any wish like ever. So that's kind of like the premise of this story, I believe. And yeah, overall, I'd give the first chapter like a B. So we are now in the final decade. We are now in 2020. So this one was Frieren actually. And yeah, this first chapter was really good. We get a sense of like Frieren and like who her old party was, and we get some backstory, and we get fast forward like, you know, what is it, 50 years? And then it was just a really solid world building chapter, and the art's really good too. So I'm gonna give Frieren an A+. So next up we have Dandadan. So the first chapter of Dandadan was pretty strong, I'd say. I feel like, you know, you get a sense, the first chapter, you jump into the aliens and the ghosts. They get possessed and abducted. It's pretty crazy. I feel like the only thing that I didn't like was like the whole abduction of Momo. That brought it down a little bit for me. So I'm gonna be giving it a B. So 2022, we got Akane Banashi. Akane Banashi, the first chapter is so strong. You kind of jump into the world of Rakugo, which is what this plot is about. And the first chapter starts off so strong with such a strong character base, and then something crazy happening at the end. Like the main character's dad gets completely expelled from like the Rakugo school, which is completely unexpected. So this was such a good chapter. I'm gonna be giving this an S. So 2023, we got Kagurabachi. Now Kagurabachi kind of blew up recently, and the first chapter was okay. I feel like we jump into when the main character was younger, we get some backstory, but I feel like there wasn't a big enough of like a hook in this first chapter. I feel like later on, like the next couple chapters after that was good, but the first chapter was pretty lackluster for me. So I'm gonna be giving this first chapter a B. So we're coming up to 2023, and this is Ichi the Witch. Now this is a brand new manga that I feel like a lot of people are talking about, but the first chapter jumps into how witches are usually only like female, and how male witches aren't like really a thing because it's almost impossible, like 0.0001% chance of being like able to become a witch. And then the story kind of jumps into how people become witches, and the main character at the end of the first chapter becomes a witch against all odds. So pretty interesting first chapter, but there was something about it that was, I don't know, a little off. So I ranked this one a little lower. I'm gonna give this one a B+. And we have made it all the way to 2025. Now it was kind of hard to find a manga that came out in 2025, but this one is called Embers. This is actually created by one of the assistants of Blue Lock, and it's another soccer manga. This one kind of starts off similarly to like, it's like a slam dunk-ish type introduction with like a delinquent, and one of the teachers kind of like gets him into soccer, and it's at the end of the chapter, I think it's been like a couple years, and now he's in high school, and that's kind of like where the debut kind of starts. You do get to see a game, and this first chapter was actually really strong. It's a shame that this was canceled, but I'm gonna be giving this one a B+. And there we have it. That was the very last one. We got all the way from 1961 to 2025. And here on the screen, I'm gonna be putting the entirety of the final tier list. So here it is. And yeah, this is it. That's crazy. Let me know down below what your favorite or which one looked like the most interesting to you, and if you enjoyed this video. If you did enjoy this video, don't forget to hit the subscribe button to join the Manga Society today. Don't forget to leave a like, comment down below. And yeah, I had a lot of fun with this video. It took a while to read all of the different chapters. Had a lot of fun with this video. So as always, this world is cruel, but at least we have manga.